Good morning, and welcome to our Seubert third quarter panel discussion. If you joined us for our first and second quarter panel discussions, we took some time and discussed the segments of our business, our commercial lines insurance, our employee benefits, and our surety practices. We spent time looking at what we can do from a proactive nature to control the costs of our insurance programs, as well as from a financial perspective, what levers we can actually pull and work internally to take more ownership over the way that we procure insurance. For our third quarter discussion, we wanted to take a more focused approach and introduce you to one of our specialty practice teams. Today's discussion will be primarily on our commercial lines of insurance and focused on the transportation industry, and still a proactive focus on two areas of risk that are facing commercial transportation industries, and creating situations where we may have gaps in coverage, but more importantly, customer interactions and falling short of where contractual obligations may be needed. Today, I want to introduce three of our members of our transportation specialty team: Brandon Guiliani, our transportation practice specialty leader; Will Long, an account executive in our transportation practice; and Jeanne Strong, who manages our claims department. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Joe.
Morning.
Jumping right in, we want to tackle two topics that are facing the transportation industry. The first being brokering of loads. At times when a carrier is, transferring a load for another individual, or this may be, putting into the hands of someone that wasn't the original party who was contracted to handle the load. The second area that we're going to discuss is in that excess layer of insurance, where after we've, pierced our primary layers of insurance and we need to get into that second layer, the umbrella levels, it's becoming more and more challenging for our transportation customers to find this insurance at all, let alone at a reasonable rate. Brandon, can you elaborate a little bit more on brokering in the transportation industry? I know what, from the position that we sit in, we refer to the term a broker as us. We're the broker on the insurance side. The insurance carrier is the carrier of nature. But when we're talking about transportation, those two terms are used in a much different way, carrier and broker. Can you give us a backdrop?
Yeah, so truck brokering, in simple terms, guys, it's basically a marriage maker, the middleman in between the shipper that owns the goods and the motor carrier, the one that is hauling the goods from point A to point B. It is a very pivotal part of the trucking industry. And unfortunately, in today's world, they demand fast deliveries, efficient deliveries. With shrinking capacity, people don't have enough manpower to deliver these loads. And because of this, double brokering is peeking its evil head into our industry, causing a lot of turmoil. For those of you that do not know, double brokering consists of the original broker tenders a load to a motor carrier. That motor carrier or fictitious actor then takes that load and brokers it out to an additional motor carrier. Well, you, the shipper, do not know and have no understanding of who is actually hauling my goods.
So in this double brokering scenario, we have someone who is contracting this load out, and it's shifting hands maybe more than one time. But at the end of the day, is the load still getting delivered?
It is sometimes. Unfortunately, in today's world, you have a lot of bad actors, right? Typically, double brokering works in two ways. One is you broker that load to an independent contractor, a one-man shop, or a company that has, 3 or 4 in their fleet. Unfortunately, they have too much on their plate, so they then take that load and broker it out to another motor carrier to deliver it. Typically, you never see a problem until there's actually a claim involved. But where our industry has took a significant change is where you have bad actors coming into play, acting as a motor carrier. So therefore, the actual broker hands it over to this fictitious motor carrier. He or she then brokers it out to an additional motor carrier who you can't vet properly, and we don't have any idea who is hauling the goods. And it's causing a mass disruption. I know when we looked at the notes year to date, it's caused over $500 million in cost to not just the shippers, but the actual brokers. Because you got to think of it this way, right? If you own the goods and you're shipping, right, you have a contractual obligation to that end user. You are doing your due diligence. You are vetting out the broker and the motor carrier that he or she is brokering that load out to. You then track your goods, right? Well, if I take your goods and I broker it out to a third party that you have no idea who they are, how can you track your freight? You can't. And a lot of times what happens is these fictitious actors take the money that they're getting paid by the broker, They brokered out to, let's just say, Will's trucking company, and Will actually does his job. He delivers the freight from point A to point B, but the fictitious actor disappears, therefore leaving Will unpaid, and we have no idea where the freight is. So you have a very upset motor carrier that then comes back on to you being the shipper. So either the shipper and or the original broker is out double money for paying for the loads. Where it also can be a problem is that fictitious actor could actually designate a motor carrier to drop it off at a location so his clan or his crew can pick up the loads and steal it, therefore leaving you, the shipper, holding the bag on the cost of the cargo, as well as double paying for the load.
Wow.
So it's definitely been a major impact. I know that we insure a lot of large brokerages, and we have seen claim activity nonstop for the last year and a half. So
it sounds like, this situation can unfold in a number of different ways. Oftentimes, this double brokering can happen and nothing happens.
Yeah.
The load still gets delivered, everyone's happy, but there's way too many areas where uncontrolled risk is introduced in these situations. So, Will, what are some of the things that we can do as a broker working with our customers to educate them on this and mitigate the risks of a double brokering scenario?
Sure. So it really comes down to due diligence. It's not easy. It's going to happen. And all you can do is do your best to try to mitigate it. We do insure a lot of brokers, and a lot of large brokers, they have the opportunity, the ability to hire someone to focus on this due diligence, which is critical because even if it's an added cost up front, it saves you in the long run in terms of paying for those double loads, claims that go unpaid because they were double brokered, reputational hit. So it's definitely very worthwhile to invest the efforts in the due diligence. And that's someone checking certificates of insurance, seeing does it make sense, call up that agent, see if they actually do insure that motor carrier. Looking on the FMCSA records, do the name and email match what you have on the load? You also have things like looking at the age of business, freight guard reports. There's a lot of carrier software out there that does some of this vetting for you. And when you do encounter double brokering, it's good to report it because that helps future brokers, future shippers help avoid that. So there's a lot of ways that you can do the due diligence to make sure you.
And you got to think too, we've all heard that saying, if it's too good to be true,
Sure.
It's probably too good to be true, right? If you have your dispatcher or your third-party logistics that they're providing a load to a motor carrier and that price is half of what that lane actually costs, guys, there's a reason behind it. And I think too, a lot of people, and I know everybody's busy, but you got to do the blocking and tackling, right? And I think that's kind of the missed piece here when we see a lot of these claims. I mean, here's the thing. If you're brokering out a load to a carrier that has 15 units on the road, but they have 0 inspections in the last year, that's an issue. I mean, guys, rule of thumb is you should have 1 inspection per unit per year at a bare bone minimum. So look at these items. I know a lot of our larger clients have a team designated when they actually receive the certificate of insurance. They call the other agent that represents them to see if there's gaps or if there's anything misleading. And I think that's a huge way to minimize risk here, Joe.
Yeah, there's even things like the broker carrier agreement should have verbiage in there about that you don't allow double brokering and it will result in non-payment. That gives you some of the legal ramifications to kind of withhold that payment so that you're not paying that bad actor.
And on top of the financial risk, you got to also look at your reputation is everything in this industry, right? If a large client hires you to ship their goods and the goods either get delayed or never show up, how good is that going to be for your reputation? Or, how are you viewed in the marketplace? Do you think that's going to help or hurt you? So, I mean, getting back to blocking and tackling, doing your due diligence, that's the main thing to minimize this exposure.
And it seems like, this is being done and born out of the need for loads to get delivered faster or to keep up with the pace and demand. But clearly, in the long run, this is going to take a whole heck of a lot more time, once you have a claim happen, once you're trying to track some of these things down. So you also elaborated on length of time in business. What would that be a red flag for?
You generally want to see a good rule of thumb is at least 90 days in business. But having a young age on that usually implies like kind of a fake shell company they've created and a motor carrier number. So that's a reason you want to kind of look at that and just kind of really vet all the information about the carrier, make sure it all matches up.
Yeah, Joe, unfortunately, what's happening in this marketplace is you have these fictitious actors that are opening up an MC number, right? They're taking the load from you and then doing whatever, right? And then just disappearing and reopening another company a month later, 2 months later. So, you know, that's why you've got to look at time in business, because if they've only been in business a couple months, even 90 days is still minimum. I know a lot of our larger clients, it's 2 years.
Right.
So you definitely need to evaluate that.
And I understand this is Temptation Island, because when you're looking at that price and how I can get this out the door at that rate, it does become a little bit of a tunnel vision of, wow, I can get this done. It'll be there tomorrow at this price. This is great. You know, really stumbled upon a deal.
Well, think about how our world has changed, right? Like when we used to buy things, we would go to the mall and we would buy it, right? Now you're on Amazon and you're pretty upset if you don't get your package in the mail the next day.
That's right.
Well, everybody has that attitude now. They want it today or they want it first thing tomorrow. And if you're a broker and you know your client wants it today or tomorrow, unfortunately, you're going to try to find that way to execute that. And it ends in the hands of a bad actor.
Yeah.
More times than none, unfortunately.
And with risk management, this is one of those areas where sometimes going slow leads you to go fast, because you anticipate what can happen and you build in those systems. But from everything I'm hearing, you know, we have contractual obligations and agreements in place. You know, we have people going about this with the right intentions, but it doesn't seem like we can entirely prevent this. Right. So when this does happen and we do need to trigger an insurance claim, what happens then, Jeannie?
Well, it's important to, you know, do all the things that Will was describing as far as being very proactive, and you want to make sure that you're documenting and trying to, you know, be as proactive as possible. But it's super important to make sure that you have a good agency behind you that has the experience and expertise to really advocate for you and work with you, partner you with the best carrier that has trucking experience. You know, a lot of carriers just aren't familiar with this type of claim. A lot of times there's just not going to be coverage for it if you're in a double brokering situation or it's a fraudulent claim, but a really good carrier and experienced broker can assist you and advise you on what to do and how to protect yourself and, you know, move forward and hopefully ensure it doesn't happen again.
And I think that this creates situations where it's a surprise to individuals that maybe there isn't coverage when this happens, because what do you mean? I have theft coverage, I have this, I have cargo coverage. Talk about where this loophole is, or this gap. You know, for us, you know, for an insuring agreement to trigger a claim, there has to be a covered peril, something that's in the agreement that says, if this happens, this happens, this happens, then we'll pay the claim. In these situations, you know, the event unfolds, and depending on where you are in that kind of supply chain, you may have coverage, you may not. What are some of those areas where we fall short in the insuring agreement to provide coverage for someone in a double brokering situation?
Yeah, I mean, it does come down in a claim scenario. It's important to, you know, we advise to submit any claim, anything to the carrier to help vet it, walk through, look at all the documentation to see what actually occurred and what's actually covered or not. Because a lot of times we do see that our clients, you know, or people believe that, well, I lost the cargo, there's coverage for it. Well, you know, certain carriers exclude things such as voluntary parting. So if you voluntarily part with the cargo to a bad actor, that's unfortunately not covered by insurance. So it's important to have that relationship with your carrier and your agent.
Yeah, as you know, with claims, there's never a cookie cutter situation. Sure. We're never gonna say there's no coverage or there is coverage. There could be some anomaly in your specific policy or exclusion in your policy. All the facts of each incident are different depending on exactly, you know, what transpired during the interaction. So we always advise to report it. And even if there's not coverage, though, if you have an experienced carrier, you know, that deals with this often, they can assist you on how to pursue, you know, maybe the fraudulent actor or give you advice on what to do. So it's just real important to work with people that really are familiar with this topic, because it is happening more and more, and we are seeing more claims come through.
And I think, you know, one thing we talk with our clients about, when you go through an insurance renewal process, there's a lot of information to provide to the underwriters to get your renewal pricing, to get your terms and conditions. But we also advocate that it's important that you interview, you underwrite the insurance carrier too, how much experience do they have in this? What's their claims team like? What loss control services do they offer?
Mhm.
What are their financial size and rating? So all these things are important to know, who you're doing business with, and are they going to be able to actually help you out when you get into a claim scenario?
Yeah.
We also advise that, there's the contingent cargo that covers you as a broker, but there's also the cargo for you if you're actually the carrier hauling. A lot of times it's beneficial to have those two coverages aligned with the same
Mhm.
carrier. So it's just, it's important to really know your carrier, make sure you're making that right partnership.
And this is a common trait across most lines of insurance, but particularly in the specialized lines in transportation, where we find people are so price driven, and we know the bottom dollar talks. But when we get into these scenarios where maybe there's not going to be coverage for this, maybe I'm going to have to pay twice for the load because I can't escape my liability in this situation. It pays to take your time to assess the carrier, to assess the parties that you're working with, and spend that, because as that shipper, you may be able to transfer the responsibility to somebody else to carry that load, but the accountability still stays with you.
Right.
And ultimately, you're going to end up footing the bill. So this is one of these areas where if it hasn't happened to you yet, maybe just wait. It's becoming more and more frequent, and it's not just stopping with double brokering. We're seeing this even triple brokered, and further convoluting the situation.
I think too, Joe, one of the an uptick in claims that we're seeing is these bad actors are taking email addresses. Typically what happens is, a true company's email address is their company in the email, right? If you receive an email from an actor that has either Gmail or a free mail service, Yahoo, whoever it is, right? Do not accept that.
That's right.
Because I mean, we've had numerous examples where they changed one initial, and it either came from a Gmail instead of our company's name. We tendered the load to them, and then it was severely costly to our insured. And I think that people don't understand that.
No.
You never know what the financial impact is going to be until it actually happens to you, right? They think right away, hey, my cargo got stolen, I'm covered. Oh, you're not.
No.
And that's just a testament exactly to back up what Will and Jay start the process early. Vet them, talk to the carriers, make sure there is expertise, and then how our industry is now with TPAs. All these carriers are outsourcing their claims. If you can find a carrier that handles claims internally and there's expertise level behind it, you should go that route.
Agreed. There's no substitute for prevention in this case, but when we know that this is an inevitable, we really got to stack the deck and make sure we've got the right team around the issue, and they can respond when it happens. Because again, most of these companies' businesses are getting it from point A to point B or setting it up for the shipment, not chasing down bad actors, not working through claim scenarios. It's really, kind of a deviation from their core business.
Right.
So it's not easy to be in the transportation industry right now. We know that with double brokering, this is creating, another form of risk that most people may not be prepared for. But another area that's really heating up, and this has been a topic across general commercial lines insurance for many years now, we've seen that umbrella space just really, really become a difficult place to get effective affordable coverage, I should say. Meaning that we used to be able to go to one carrier to get a $10 million limit. Now we're finding that we may be splitting that up between at least two, oftentimes 3, 4, depending on the industry we're in, depending on how much insurance we need. So we know that two things have been happening in the excess marketplace. The cost of insurance has continued to go up, and the amount of insurance that's available has continued to come down. So it's getting more and more complicated. To further make things, difficult to deal with, we've seen the nuclear verdict space in the auto liability claims area just blow up. And for reference purposes, we're talking about $18 billion for nuclear verdicts. And a nuclear verdict is anything $10 million in a claim and above. So in 22, we saw 18 billion. Prior year was 9.1. Prior year was 4.9. So we've seen almost a year-over-year doubling of these catastrophic nuclear verdict claims, meaning that we're burning through those primary layers of insurance, and that excess umbrella layer has become vital to put a backstop and prevent you from ultimately shutting your doors. Let's talk a little bit more about what's going on in the excess marketplace as it relates to trucking specifically, and what our customers can do to prepare themselves.
I think, I tell all of our colleagues here, you got to look at your renewal dates, right? In between them, there's 12 months. Look at your expiration date as your game day. What do you do before the game? You practice, right? And I think our industry as a whole has got a little bit complacent. They don't start evaluating correct options until they're 60 days out. You cannot do that. When you are 6 months to 3 months out, you should be interviewing your carriers. And instead of trying to piece that excess layer with multiple carriers, talk to who's writing your primary layer. Go to them, say, guys, look, I want additional layers of insurance. I don't want to deal with a third party handling the extra layers, and see if they can do it. A lot of times they cannot, Joe, because, you know, as you attested to, you know, 5-6 years ago, typically a claim would not pierce that $1 million layer. Now today it's every day. And whether it folds at 1.5 million up to 100 million, we've seen recently. Get out early, make sure that you guys are practicing safety. Make sure that your driving roster, you're putting proactive protocols in place for your adverse drivers. Just get the ball moving early. Don't be delayed. Because I mean, and another, which Jeanne, I'm sure will attest to, right? If that claim pierces that $1 million layer, all of a sudden you have additional sets of hands in the cookie jar. And then you have confliction, because if you have 3 carriers dealing with one claim, you have 3 sets of opinions, you have 3 sets of adjusters, and the only person that loses is the motor carrier, because they're going to be the one that has to pay for it at the end of the day.
It's very difficult for a customer to navigate through that too. It's really hard if you got multiple adjusters on just one big claim. I'm sure they're very stressed about it, because you don't know how the outcome's going to be. So again, that's why it's super important to make sure that you have a very experienced broker and, you know, hopefully carriers on your side. But we have a very experienced, amazing claims team here at Seubert that can help navigate through that and manage these carriers when you have a significant claim like that, to ensure that we're advocating on your behalf and, you know, making sure that we, you know, mitigate your risk as much as possible.
I can't underscore that claims piece enough. I mean, ultimately, people buy insurance for 2 reasons: because you have to, contractually obligated, statutorily required to operate in the state. But the other side of it is to get their claims paid. It's not more complicated than that. People buy insurance to get their claims paid. So working with a broker that's got expertise in these areas to not respond with, sorry, you didn't have the right coverage, or sorry, I've never had a claim like this to deal with. You know, getting into the details. We have 4 dedicated claims people that are really every day dealing with adjusters, dealing with the aftermath of these incidents, and learning from these losses to say, with the next one, we're going to do this. With the next one, we're going to mitigate it this way, and applying those proactively. So I cannot stress that claims piece enough, because while it is a reaction, we're waiting and something has happened and now we're reacting to it, there's still very much a proactive nature of how we respond to those claims that dramatically change the total cost of the claim at the end of the day and the duration that claim lasts.
Yeah. And as Brandon was talking to about, you know, going to that carrier to see what kind of limits they can put up. Because if you do have a good carrier, insurance carrier partnership that can put up more limits, they have more skin in the game. They have more interest in resolving that claim timely, efficiently, and, you know, for the best outcome for all parties. You know, you see sometimes when you have a lot of layers stacked that, you know, some of the adjusters on the lower layers on the primary might say, you know what, my $1 million is definitely gone. I'm tendering it over. I'm washing my hands. Now you guys deal with it. And it makes it a lot harder for you to kind of negotiate the best outcome for yourself.
It really is. And, you know, we oftentimes see where this could be a collective effort and everyone goes, man, this could be a really expensive claim. How do we work together? There's oftentimes a guarding of those limit layers where until it's getting close to mine, I'm not really doing anything to chip in here and, you know, improve the outcome of that claim. It's almost a wait and see. And that's, again, not an effective way. So
one thing that we advise highly is, if, let's say, the primary carrier will not offer additional layers, Joe, we ask them, who do you want to partner with, right? Because at some point, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're going to have to deal with the additional excess layers, their sets of adjusters. So ask your primary layer, who do you guys prefer we go to? Who can handle the claims? And then look, too, a lot of these are clients, right? When they buy insurance, their margins are shrinking. So they're going for the cheapest avenue, right? Well, a lot of times those excess carriers have 60 pages of exclusions where you may think, hey, I have another $1 million over my auto. but they're excluding all of your operations, and you're going to be left high and dry.
Mhm.
So make sure that you're evaluating it. Talk to the primary layer to see who they feel can be a good advocate on their behalf.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting perspective too, because oftentimes, there's coverages that could be picked up in an umbrella layer,
Absolutely.
but at the same time, there's areas where it could be excluded, and where we think we're going to have more, cash to play with through the claim, we don't.
Right.
And this brings me to my last question, which, the constant, we're always being evaluated. What's the right amount of insurance to carry? How much do I need? In 2023, as a commercial transportation operation, naturally what you're hauling, how much you're hauling, the number of people you have, the states you operate in, that's going to dictate some things. But is there a measuring stick for what a reasonable amount of excess insurance is in 2023?
That's a tough question. I mean, you have what you're, required by the state, by the federal government to carry. But then at the same time, you have to kind of look inward to say, what are my safety practices? What are my assets at risk? Because really, insurance is just another mean to transfer risk, to mitigate risk. So, what is your comfort level with how much you can absorb versus how much you want to pass off, and look at the pricing to see if it makes sense and for the coverage.
And that's really, the right way to go. Instead of waiting for someone to tell you, you need X amount of dollars in insurance, and then you're just responding to a contractual requirement, really understand, hey, I've got no business interruption response here. This is going to be an expensive claim for me. I need to carry more in this area, but we're doing so many great things over here. These are potentially non-existent claims.
Right. And, certain, clients may have carried a certain limit for so many years. They may not have, they've gotten used to what they carry. They are comfortable with it, but it doesn't hurt to ask, to say, hey, what does additional million look like? What does additional 2 million look like? Because you might be surprised. Maybe you're like, oh, wow, I actually would pay that to not have that at risk.
Well, that's right. And, insurance looks expensive until you actually see what it costs compared and what it, really covers through a claim situation. So, this is, again, credit to working with a broker that's got specialization in these areas, that we can talk about the nuances of these claims, how expensive they can get, where those pitfalls and shortages are going to come. And then more importantly, this is a marriage. Most brokers can go out and place coverage for any type of industry with some carrier. It's like Plinko. It's going to get to the bottom. You may not like where it goes. Our approach is much more about pairing that carrier, that marriage with the customer, and building some equity in that relationship, understanding what you do, leveraging those resources so they can improve, and having realistic conversations around what's the right amount of insurance to carry and what can you expect to happen in these next 12 months. A parting thought is I really like Brandon's approach of thinking about your expiration date as game day, and those other 364 days of the year are really what you as the customer are doing to help prepare yourself for that renewal and take control of your insurance spend. So we're at our time. I want to go ahead and thank everyone for joining us. These panel discussions are meant to provide opportunities for you to learn more about industry segments. If there's ever an interest in a topic or a suggestion, by all means, you can reach out to us at Seubert, and we would be happy to discuss that one. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.